Yeah, perfect. Welcome everybody. I'm really thrilled about this to welcome you to the first conversation in this series, What Happens After the End. The desire to create this series came from a really repetitive and burning realization that I've had over the last year. And I'm sure many of you all have had, which is this nothing will ever be the same again. And like the past is over. And I think a lot of times that is framed in our conversations as grief and loss, which I think is super real, but I also think it brings a possibility for hope, and that maybe this can be an opening into a different way of living. And so central to this, a central question to this series is, of course, what happens after the end? And over the next few months, I'll be asking some of the most visionary minds that I know this question, and others inquiring into community care, the end of the world, collective trauma, and new imaginations. I'd like to especially thank Rachel Walensky and Marianne and the whole team at Wendy's Subway, as well as Marin, hi Marin, Marin Arasanos and Pratt Institute for being such supporters and shepherds of this series and my thinking around it. And also, before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge that while this reading is happening virtually, it is also being hosted in both in Boulder, Colorado and Brooklyn, New York, which is built upon unceded Indigenous lands, specifically the Cheyenne and Arapaho people and the Canarsie and Lenape people, respectively. I acknowledge the continual displacement and violence perpetrated against Indigenous people and people of color by the US, and am aware that these kinds of acknowledgements can be misused as stand-ins for actual decolonization work, which is something for us to bear in mind as we go forward in our ongoing commitment to accountability, reparation, and equity. So before I go any further and I introduce my luminous guest, I want to pass it over quickly to Wendy's so that they can say a few words.
Thank you so much, Erika, and thank you all for being here today. I'm Marianne Janowski. I'm the Digital Initiatives and Education Fellow here at Wendy's, and we're a nonprofit reading room, writing space, and independent publisher located in Bushwick, Brooklyn. And we provide an open and versatile space for expanded modes of reading, writing, and publishing, and we're dedicated to creative, critical, and discursive engagement with arts and literature, with the belief that equitable access to reading and collaborative forms of knowledge production are catalysts for social transformation. So that's basically a very long-winded way of saying we as an organization are committed to the questions Erika's asking. And if you're not, familiar with our work, we definitely encourage you to check us out, come to more events. So thank you all for being here today, and I'll pass it back to Erika for the introduction.
I love the genre of introductions in general. I think they're like very central to my ethics. So it's really fun to be able to introduce a friend. Andrea Abi-Karam is an Arab American genderqueer punk poet, performer, cyborg, writing on the art of killing bros, the intricacies of cyborg bodies, trauma, and delayed healing. Selected by Bhanu Khapil, Andrea's debut, EXTRATRANSMISSION, from Kelsey Street Press in 2019, is a poetic critique of the US military's role in the war on terror. Simone White selected their second assemblage, Villainy, for publication in fall 2021 at Nightboat Books. With Kay Gabriel, they co-edited We Want It All, an anthology of radical trans poetics from Nightboat 2020. They are a rollerblading Leo, currently obsessed with queer terror and convertibles. Yes. I met Andrea at Naropa Summer Writing Program some amount of years ago. We initially bonded over our communal frustration with the bro, with a capital B, the poetry bro, the noise bro, the Marxist bro. I remember standing next to them and muttering, "Why are they everywhere?" And I think they replied with something like, "I know, right? Go home." At the next reading that summer, they took the mic and silenced the room with their Kill Bro, Kill Cop serial poem. And with deep admiration, I remember thinking, oh, you can just say it. A trope in MFA writing programs is the critique of show, don't tell, but Andrea rejects that. Should they show and tell? They put in the work, they show up and put their language on the line. It is often a source of anxiety to try to figure out whether the quote unquote radical poet is presenting an imaginary exercise or whether they believe themselves. That is never an anxiety with Andrea Abi-Karam. Their poetry and their work in the overlapping world of connected punk, queer, gender-fucked web of bodies and care through revolutionary language is abundant, with both theory supported by bone-shattering language, as well as praxis, which is furthered by their body on the line and beside you. So welcome, Andrea. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh my God, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. And thank you, Wendy's, for hosting us and creating space for these conversations. I also remember handing you at Stacy Sismazik's book launch, I handed you a poem about killing the Dharma breath, which we had to experience and suffer throughout Naropa.
They're everywhere. I'm currently in Boulder and they have not gone away. So with that, I'm going to jump right into my first question, which is kind of long, but it's two-part, and I feel like so everyone keeps talking about going back to normal, and like they can't wait to go back to normal. But I know that normal of the before time for a lot of us and for a lot of our friends, community members, was barely surviving. Many of us felt super trapped by capitalism, mental health, societal standards. And so instead of thinking about going back, I've heard a lot of people around me and myself wonder about what happens afterwards. What are the possibilities of existing once we're in the aftermath of trauma? Because of course it's ongoing. But I don't think that's the only possibility of this binary. So I wanted to ask about the difference for you between returning and making something new, and whether there is a certain way you align yourself right now.
Big question.
I know.
I really resonate with the sentiment that you share with so many other like queer freaks and friends and community, that normal, like the before times before COVID, was not this like state of bliss. It was like this state of being trapped and controlled by late stage neoliberal capitalism. And many of us were scraping by in various ways. And this like intense upheaval has caused such an intense restructuring of everyone's lives, but not such a restructuring that has like horizontal or like made things more equitable by any means. So I also am not rushing to return to the before times, although there are certainly things that I miss. Like I'm a poet and a performer, and one of my favorite things in the world is performing in front of a live audience, and that obviously has disappeared. Although I'm grateful for the many virtual stages and getting to go all kinds of places. I'm going to the UK on Wednesday, which is awesome.
That's so great.
I'm going to Montreal in April, and I'm going to Santa Cruz in April. Kind of these things that maybe would have been possible, maybe not in the before time. So like performing in front of a live audience, which I see as like a space of like collaboration and like participatory politics, and not like, you know, having a script and then like reading, rather just like doing that and like not reading the room. I feel more like I like to react and work with the room when I'm performing, which is kind of like a strategy that I learned from Cecilia Vicuña, who I'm obsessed with and I love very much. And so, yeah, I'm not eager to go back to the before times, but I guess I'm going to answer your question in a way that is maybe frustrating, that I feel like as like a single subjectivity, I can't give an answer as to like what the aftermath looks like. And I feel like a group of people can can collectively imagine something about the aftermath. And that's one of the interventions that Kay and I hope to make with the anthology. We want it all an anthology of radical trans poetics. It's like, as a collection of radical trans writers, what can we imagine as like both a hyper present, a reckoning with the past, and like by like collecting and aggregating all together, what is the space that we can make together? So I think about this with respect to like the difference between like single author works and anthologies. And I feel like I've struggled to try to imagine like what could be a queer utopia. And I've struggled to put that in my books until I was like, well, I can't just do that myself. I need to do it with other people, obviously. But that also applies to the methodology of like writing, like writing with others versus like writing yourself. But to speak to like experiencing a little bit, to experiencing trauma and where do you go from there? What I'm going to read from later, my second book, Villainy, which is coming out in September, like Erika mentioned, I wrote during probably the most traumatic period, one of the most traumatic periods of my life. It was short. I wrote a lot of it shortly after the 2016 ghost ship fire while I was living in Oakland, where 36 community members, many of whom were queer and trans people, died in this fire at a DIY space. And also along the times of, 45 got elected, the Muslim ban, and in the Bay Area, there was this like resurgence of white supremacists who would just come to Berkeley like every weekend and try to fight us, basically. So it was a very like high impact, high intensity, like highly traumatic time where you still like it felt like I couldn't even like catch a breath because I was still trying to participate in the streets and do street medic stuff and direct action stuff, like 6 weeks after the ghost ship fire happened. And I was talking to one of my roommates. I live in this really cute collective house in Brooklyn. And I was talking to one of my roommates on Sunday about this event, inviting people to come. And I was telling them about the framing of the event. And she was like, well, the only way to survive like both trauma and the apocalypse is with creative practice. And I was like, oh my God, you just said that so perfectly. And that's my roommate, Ariel. So shout out to her. And yeah, I mean, I feel like the only way that I was able to like survive as a person during the aftermath of the ghost ship fire and the Muslim ban and that like awful time period was through writing and and being able to share the writing with people who like also kind of were there with me in that dark time.
Yeah. That was such like a powerful answer to that question. It was like way more than I expected. It was so exciting. And yeah, so it's like, from what you were saying, I'm like hearing like all of these, like not this like one big cataclysmic event, but like these like mini apocalypses that just like kept happening into like this sustained moment that brought you to this book. And so I do have a question specifically about the apocalypse. And so like the word apocalypse is weird, right? Because it doesn't mean anything nefarious. The etymology is to uncover or reveal. And so you kind of answered this question, but maybe you have more to say about it. Like, do you think that poetry or art making in general, or a creative practice, has a responsibility to be like apocalyptic in this way of uncovering or revealing?
This is a good question too. I love that you included the etymology of apocalypse. I actually didn't know that it was about uncovering. And one of the things that I do feel like poetry has a responsibility to is to go beyond a mode of witness and to kind of engage a style of like documentary that what's fucked up, you know, talking about things that are fucked up in your own life. For example, I'm not sure if that was clear, but I'm trying to say that I think poetry has the responsibility to engage the documentary where the author has like stakes in this particular documentary. And I'm not saying that you can't write something outside of your own subjectivity. I think you can. I think there's definitely certain hard limits around that, but I think you can write like a sort of like a mix of subjectivities into your work if you're well researched and responsible. And to think about, I mean, I guess like apocalypse is just a really dramatic and hard-hitting way of saying that the people of the world have to reckon with the truth of what they've done to the world. It's like we think about COVID, right? And it's an ecological and viral disaster caused by humans, most likely because of like deforestation and ecocide and forcing like bats to migrate prematurely and like removing their habitats and causing that jump to happen.
Yes.
Yeah. So again,
Absolutely.
based on the way that you're framing the question, I'm now thinking about apocalypse as like a reckoning with the truth, and poetry absolutely has a responsibility to expose and share. And I love source documents, and I've done a lot of reading of like US government documents and done a lot of research on the war on terror, and reading creepy State Department documents and medical records and stuff like that. And I think poetry has a responsibility also to be able to translate certain source documents and source texts for a bigger readership.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, you were talking about implicating yourself and saying like, so I have, this is so great. Okay, so in an interview, so excited. In a previous interview with Bam, I think you did talk also about implicating the I, and I had a question about that specifically. And you said that you threw away like a whole draft of your book because you were like, it's not implicating myself. And like, if there's nothing at stake, then like, what's the point in the book? And this is kind of a selfish question, so I'm just going to own that. But like, I'm writing a thesis. I'm in the process of that same thing of like, what's the point of this poem? And like, I'm not even in it. Like, what are the ethics about that? Like what, like this implication of self. So I was wondering if you could actually go into that a little bit more, and how it lives on the page, and also then how it also, so this notion is a sort of ethical one. So does it live off the page? Is it also a decision like in between people in the street? And then how could this relate then back to that apocalyptic uncovering, I guess, if you can see my little chain of connections. But yeah, I wanted to talk more about implicating the I, basically.
I think it's very important to implicate the I. To explain for our current audience the context of that, what I said in that particular piece of writing was, when I was in my MFA program, I went to Mills. I went into it really wanting to write about global capitalism and like its effects on urban spaces. I'm like also really really love like urban architecture and things like that. And so I was writing like this draft, and I made characters out of different parts of the city. Like the mayor was a character, like the street was a character, stuff like that. But I was not a character. And it was coming across as like really emotionally flat. Like I did a few readings and I was like working on it. It was coming across as really emotionally flat. And I had done a ton of reading, like they made us read books that were aligned with our interests. So I'd done a lot of reading of contemporary poetry of poets who were kind of writing about cities and global capitalism and stuff like that. And I think my brain had just gotten like clouded with like other voices, as tends to happen in the MFA. And so I just scrapped it, and I started writing these like kill bro poems, which I had a huge stake in because I when I lived in Boston, you know, like before I was visibly trans, I was street harassed a lot, and I kind of like, I just needed to get back at them like in a really serious way. And so I started the suite of Kill Bro poems, and it felt so good and cathartic. And at the first workshop I brought them to, the professor was like, well, these are so violent, like how can you write this? And one of my classmates, who I think believe is in the room, said, well, bros are violent, like we are absolutely entitled to write this violence. And you know, as Fanon says, decolonization doesn't happen without a moment of intense violence. And so, and we also know like nonviolence protects the state, like all these things. And so I felt entitled to this violence. And then, you know, we're thinking about like global capitalism, it's this big conceptual thing that is of course very violent. And then who is part of that network, like that trickles down? The bro is part of that network, you know, like the cop, the US military soldiers, the senators, like they're all part of this matrix, and they all have like strings that rise up to a big umbrella of global capitalism. So I figured out that by attacking like smaller parts within like this bigger conceptual frame that I was, you know, connected to in some way, whether it was like directly or intergenerationally or, you know, whatever, I could, you know, be part of it, like as a subjectivity. And one of the things that I like to do in, you know, my projects is create this big like polyvocal web. So there's lots of voices, there's lots of subjectivities, and then it's not clear who is who or what's what, or it's very like, you know, they go in and out of each other, and they kind of like rearrange and hybridize as subjectivities. And then part of that is, you know, gesturing towards like a big collective we.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's, so I've gotten like similar feedback recently that like, everyone's like, you're so angry. And I was like, I'm fucking angry. Like,
Yes.
are you not angry? And so I guess like what I want to know is like, you also write a lot about vengeance and like anger. And so like, is vengeance and anger a vessel for community care? Can it be something that's productive and like beautiful and loving?
Absolutely. I think we would all feel so much better if we wrote vengeance poems. Because sometimes it's not like, if you're getting, you know, whatever the type of like violence you're experiencing is, like whether it's like street harassment or like whatever, sometimes it's not safe to react violently, you know, like what if you're like home, you're like walking home alone, and then like 3 men like are street harassing you, like you have to make a decision in that moment if you're going to yell at them, and like they could react like even worse, and then, you know, it's 1 against 3, not good odds, you know what I mean? You have to like, you have to take care of yourself in the moment. So it's not always possible to react violently or like yell at people if they're, you know, treating you randomly and systemically. Like that's not always possible in the moment. And so it is possible in, you know, the form of the vengeance poem.
Right. And, you know, maybe some people that are reading my poems and some people that read your poems at Mills, like that anger wasn't for them. And maybe that's what the poems are trying to bring into the apocalypse, is the people that those poems are for, that resonate with that anger. And speaking of those people, so, okay. So as I've mentioned, I'm a Virgo rising. So I was reading you and Kay's introduction for the anthology. Yeah, I have it, but it's like beneath a precarious stack of books right here. So I'm gonna try and pull it out like Jenga so we can both have it on the screen. But maybe this is a waste of time. Yeah, we did.
I just want to mention that the anthology just got nominated for a Lammy today in LGBTQ anthology. So fingers crossed.
Wow, that's such a great thing to hear. So I was reading the afterword. I read before. I read a lot of my friends' poems. in there. Neon's here, Neon's in the anthology. And there's this theme in you and Kay's writing of lists. Y'all are listing a lot of things, which I like. The reason I bring it up because I got like excited because it's like Virgo was very excited about that. So, but so there's a list of your intentions and desires as editors. There's a list of the way the works in the book work and interact with each other. And then there's an extensive list in the back of your friends and loves and comrades that contributed to the community that held the book. And so in this context, lists are like this very like loving and expansive and inclusive thing. Well, I think that oftentimes listing is seen as like this sterile type A activity. And I love that like queering of lists. So I wanted to bring it in this space. And the question is basically very simple. Like, what do you think about lists?
I think lists are really useful, and I don't think they have to be sterile, as Kay and I executed. And I also, part of the point we also wanted to make with the lists was that they're not complete. Like the point is for the list to be added to, and part of working on an anthology is to like begin the intervention like in the wider scheme of literature at large, and then for it to continue and be extended. And so I mean, the ultimate hope is that this is one of many different types of radical trans anthologies, and that people start making like different types of projects.
Yeah, and I love that because I feel like, especially in trans poetry and literature and any kind of art or existence that trans people take up space in, it's like if there's one of them, then there doesn't need to be more. And like, oh, we have our trans book, and then it's like, you did it, good job, and then it moves on. But like there's way more expressions of transness than I can like even imagine, which is like really hot to me. I like love that so much.
Yeah, I was talking this morning about the Lammies with my lover, Lix, who's maybe in the room, about the Lammy categories, because they're all kind of funny categories. And I said to them, I was like, I hope we get to a point where there can be a category just for trans anthology rather than LGBTQ anthology. Like,
right, yeah.
At that point where there's such an abundance of trans lit that we have to make new word categories.
Yeah, I mean, and I know you and I both know that it's not for lack of trans experience or like right. Trans desire of expression. So I have one last question before we get to your reading, which I'm really excited about, is that like, so if this was the end and then it's something different came after this moment,
oh my God.
Would and it can't be people because that's a given. Would you take anything with you, and would you save anything?
Do you know? Where am I going? Do you know, or we don't know?
You're going to what happens after. I don't know. You get to imagine that.
I would take my rollerblades and a selection of my library, and I would put it in my shared convertible, and then go to wherever is next in the convertible.
Okay, so follow-up question. I just read an interview with Iman Marsal, and it's called Books to Cross the Ocean With, because she was immigrating to the United States, and like if you had to leave everything except for like what you could carry, and you could only carry like 3 books off the top of your head.
Oh my God, this is so brutal. Okay. I want to bring Revolutionary Letters.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like looking around. I want to bring Cecilia Vicuña. It's a giant book, but her collected that Kelsey Street put out because it has everything. And I would bring. Wait, how many do I get? I get 3. No,
you get 3. I mean, you could like argue with me.
Okay, well, I want to bring those two. I want to bring the anthology, and I want to bring a copy of Extra Transmission.
Yeah, of course. I love that. So
what would you bring?
What would I bring? Oh, I wasn't expecting to be asked the question. I would bring big ones. Like, yeah. I think well, shit. I mean, I would bring Directed by Desire by June Jordan, I think. Because it's fat and full of good. I would bring I might bring Nightwood by Juna Barnes. Like reading that book as a teenager was the first time I knew it was like a very, it's like a,
also a book you can like reread a million times. So.
It was very sentimental. And then third one, yeah, I mean, like I would do the same as you. If I had a book, I would bring it with me, but like I'd bring like We Want It All or something. All my friends are here. And then I could have my friends with me. Yeah, that's what I would do. So at this point, I want to invite you to read a little. I'm so excited to hear about your book. You could talk about it if you want, but you don't have to. And then afterwards, if there's time and people want to ask questions, you can message me questions. But yeah, thank you so much. And I'm going to let you take the stage.
Thank you for all of your deep questions. I'm going to put my laptop on a big stack of books right now. 1 second. Okay. So as Erika knows well, and some other folks in the audience, I love to throw my pieces of paper while I'm reading on the floor. I don't think I can replicate that, but I'm doing that for you. So I'm gonna read like for about 15 minutes, a cut from Villainy, in the context of which I sort of explained a little bit. I was answering one of Erika's questions, and yeah, I wrote most of it. I wrote the core of it that I built the rest of the book around in like early 2017. And then I kind of wrote the last section of it in 2018 during an editing process. It originally won a contest to be published at Leifvig, and then Leifvig decided they were closing. So it was orphaned for about a year, and then Nightboat took it on about a year ago during early pandemic times. So I'm really excited that it's coming out with Nightboat, and I'm going to read now. The end of fascism looks like centuries of queers dancing on the grave of capitalism, the state, colonialism, Nazis, racism, oppression. It will be a grand party, even grander than Mardi Gras, and there will be no reason to sleep because there will be no need to work, and there will be such a revelatory pallor to the whole thing. The photos will be exquisite and the libations and snacks fucking delicious. There will be a giant dance party, and Club Chai will DJ it, and we'll be at the Stud, and we'll all fucking dance until we sweat hard and makeup runs between faces, a transference, a transfusion of glam, a fusion of sweating bodies into a whatever singularity, a transfusion out of a fucking oppressed, miserable existence into a revelry, a full-blown revelry of queerness and desire that we only now have just barely begun to imagine, You fuck me with your entire hand in a room full of the dead. The dead are inside boxes behind glass. You fuck me so we can feel for 1 second that our friends are not dead, that they are living inside of us. A security guard approaches and you stop. I pull you up from the floor by the lapels of your leather jacket, face covered in cum. I exhale and absorb our dead friends into my body, like you opened up a gateway for their arrival. I absorb them into my body and hope they will stay and that they're happy and dry and warm. And I give up the possibility of sleep for myself in an effort to make an environment for my dead friends, a social space, a closed world. A slow song comes on. It's called the Leaving Song. The crowd pushes forward, but there is no longer a forward to break into. The crowd tries anyway until my feet are no longer on the floor and your feet are no longer on the floor. And I press my hand against your cock while I am pressed against so many other people. And so many other people are pressed against you. And some of them are the same and some of them are just more. And our feet are off the ground. You are moaning. Some of the mass is concerned that you're going to pass out, that the possibility of a singularity unbecoming singularity is beyond the present, is too soon. Our feet are off the ground. The crowd pushes forward and your cum covers my hand. The others pressed against me cover the back of my neck in sweat. You begin to fall and I pull you up so you don't fall beneath the feet of the expanded self. I want a better apocalypse. This one sucks. So why don't you just fuck me out of reality? Unbecoming. Imagine the possibility of singularity unbecoming. Imagine the possibility of unbecoming. It is imagined because the Nazi who shot a protester in Seattle bled out of jail within a couple of days. It is imagined because a bounty is placed on the head of the person who punched Richard Spencer on J20. It is imagined because the gay face of the alt-right is coming to Berkeley next week. It is imagined because civil disobedience just got banned in 5 states. It is imagined because a mosque got torched in Seattle on MLK Day. It is imagined because they have the money to take us all down. It is imagined because a bulletproof vest costs $400 to $700. It is imagined because I try to read theory, but I just think of you fucking me with your entire hand. It is imagined because we have yet to imagine the possibility of singularity unbecoming, imagine the possibility of unbecoming. It is imagined because we have yet to articulate a collective desire. I think about the limits of what I will and will not do to stop this. I think about the limits of what I will and will not do in order to stop this. I have limits of what my body is capable of what my body can withstand, how much trauma I can absorb. I think about the limits of what I will and will not do to stop this. I have the limits of my resources, my networks, my friends. I think about the limits of what I will and will not do in order to stop this. I don't want to think about the limits anymore, but I feel as though they are not thought of enough. I think about the limits of what I will and will not do to stop this, but I don't want to think about the limits because all of us together are expansive. I think about the limits of what I will and will not do to stop this while a friend texts me and says she saw my mugshot from 2012 while reading about the J20 DC protests. I put a rush on my FBI file because I need to know where I stand in all of this. Just a whatever singularity, collective spectator, violence, anti-narrative, a closed world, a social space, language as a community made out of signs, a pure world of signs, the storage of torture, dissemination as colonization of the mind, when the ritual went overboard because the photos from Abu Ghraib got deleted, because our relationships to each other are documented. Be wary of the fringe. In order to transcend national boundaries, I think, in order to transcend the limits of a whatever singularity, I think about wanting to document everything and how I also want to delete everything. I think about wanting to free up space to document new things. I think about wanting to document new things and how I have to delete digital relationships in order to do this. I scroll through correspondence from people I have fucked before I delete them. I scroll through correspondence from ex-friends before I delete them. I scroll through correspondence from ex-friends that I did performances with before I save the photos and delete the text. I scroll through correspondence from the dead and can't bring myself to delete them. I scroll through the names of who is showing at the SF MoMA and think about how the wrong people get deleted and how art institutions continue to support murderers like Carl Andre and forget people who are actually important like Ana Mendieta. I scroll through public family records I have tried to delete from my memory, but I'm now trying to uncover. And once I finish scrolling, I delete them in hopes it makes it harder for the FBI to find me. A nation built up like a secret everyone knows. A nation built up on a global web of lives. A nation built up like power washers that clean cum off the sidewalk. A nation built up against a simple villain. I am the villain, but how dare you think me to be simple? This myth is hard on the body. I would abandon myself for sweat, for this loss of feeling up against everything as a whatever singularity. People work for the US military to get visas and then get denied entry after 10 years of service. Thousands occupy airports. I want to go to SFO, but stay up too late and sit in the sun instead. People are rioting at SFO. People are rioting at JFK. People who are citizens get sent to places where they've never been. I wake up every morning surrounded by death. I wake up every morning surrounded by solidified and aggressive racism based on terror on the places capitalism has left untouched for now, where the tendrils haven't wrapped around quite yet, haven't extended control yet. Now they exercise power in a new but actually an old way. I now wait for my ribs to stretch and widen out so I can lay down flat, so I can slip through borders and barricades and walls and screens, so I can slip through the tightening entanglements. I wait for my ribs to stretch and widen so I can lay down flat, so I can slip through the borders, walls, tightening entanglements, TV screens, flat glass meant for crashing through, flat glass, pain after pain, the kind of momentum that nothing in the world can stop. I'll run through all the glass panes, one after another, after another, and I will be beautiful, and I'll get cuts and enjoy each and every one because my power will be marked upon my skin forever. I hope that others will notice these marks and be reminded of how I have endured and how I will continue to endure. I keep running through them, sheet after sheet after sheet, and my boots begin to fray, the soles splitting from the crunch of so much glass beneath my clothes, but my clothes begin to unravel. I let them. I am becoming unbound. I am unraveling. I am unbecoming. I am trying to transition into a world without so many sheets of glass to run through. But honestly, I don't know where to look right now. I just see a trap of endless sheets of glass stretched out before me. A nation built up like a secret everyone knows, a big nation built up on a global web of lives, a nation built up like power washers that clean cum off the sidewalk, a nation built up against a simple villain. I am the villain, but how dare you think me to be simple? This myth is hard on the body. Thank you.
Oh my God, that was so good. Thank you. Yeah, like I asked you to read after we had this conversation because I just like didn't want to follow it, and I was so smart for doing that. That was incredible. Yeah. I also wanted to bring up a really smart thought that Neon had, which was like, we need merch. We need Villainy merch with all of this written on t-shirts so we can wear it.
I really want to do a shirt that's I want a better apocalypse. This one sucks.
Yes, like a muscle tee, that would be really, yeah.
Like a tote bag.
I would pay for
a tote.
Uh-huh.
To get into
So we have a few more minutes. If anybody has any questions, I'll keep the chat open and keep glancing at it. Yeah, like that's a question. Let's see. Let's imagine a better apocalypse for a second. So all the bros die. Number one. Number two, the sky turns like a hot shade of like eggplant. Yeah, any contributions to this collaborative apocalypse from anybody is welcome.
The stud reopens
No, you're fine.
original location and never closes and doesn't have to pay rent. In fact, none of us have to pay rent.
No rent. Why do we need rent? It's the apocalypse.
Exactly.
Love that. Yeah, fuck a landlord. All lords, period, are excommunicated from our apocalypse. You know, avalanches are just
Human-induced ecological disaster.
Human-induced ecological disaster.
It's canceled.
Yeah, okay, well, you're all invited. So, oh yeah, okay, great. So, there's a question. Can you talk more about moving from I to we in your writing, and like what sort of thinking happens, especially regarding the responsibility that comes with speaking for a we? That is a great question.
Wow, that's a hard-hitting question, Mai. I have thought a lot about this, and I don't have an easy answer. And I feel like I've kind of moved back and forth between what are the ethics of this and what are ways to do it in a generative way and not in a violent way, or like, not violent to the people we want to support, and all of that. To bring it back to Naropa, I asked Dawn Lindy Martin this question when I was in her workshop, and she was like, there are no rules. I asked her, I was like, what are the rules and responsibilities and ethics of like poets writing for experiences you haven't necessarily had? And she was like, there are no rules. And the fact that she said that like kind of blew my mind. And she was like, the only rules you have are, the ones that you are imposing on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that moment was really freeing for me, because I think I was like overthinking it. And of course, I think there are like limits and exceptions and definitely things you should not do. But she said to me, she was like, you have to give yourself permission to like write about what you want to write about. And that kind of pivoted my like outlook and just kind of gave me this permission to sink into what I wanted to sink into. And I will say, with respect to like extra transmission, there's like a subjectivity in extra transmission that is one of like a US female veteran who served in the War on Terror and experienced a traumatic brain injury, which is like the signature injury of the War on Terror. So there's lots of people who have experienced traumatic brain injuries, and that comes with memory loss. And so returning and not being able to like remember your friends, your family, your life, and remaking, like this forced remaking of identity because of memory loss and trauma. And like, obviously I didn't serve in the military. And part of the project of the book is to critique the War on Terror. But I wanted to use that subjectivity as something to braid through thinking about all of the various violences of like the US military war machine and all the ways it affects like people, and thinking about it too is like around gender, and particularly like wanting to zoom out, like thinking about the case in which like people who are not from the US who are trying to get US citizenship, who enlist in the military and then go to war and experience like unbelievable trauma, and then after that there's no care for them to recover. Mm-hmm. And also often citizenship at the end of that is an illusion and denied. And so thinking about all those bigger things connecting to that type of subjectivity around, borders, military, war. But I definitely like wrestled with what are the ethics of including that type of experience in a book when I haven't had it. And I think part of the responsibility is like you have to wrestle with it. And
and like you can't, like I think it goes back to like implicating yourself, like how much are you willing to put yourself on the line to be able to like have this we. And I do think it comes across, it's like pretty clear in writing that does implicate self and that doesn't, and like the difference between those two.
Yeah, and like to make it explicit, like I have a stake in the war on terror because like I want it to end. And like
Yeah.
my family's from Lebanon, and the Middle East has been ravaged by the war on terror for 21 years now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really great question, and I really love Dawn's offering to that. I could totally see her saying that. Like,
in the moment I was like, frankly, I was like shocked. I was like, oh my God, what?
Yeah, I mean, I've asked that same question to Tongo Eisen-Martin, because he's like, he's kind of the same thing. He was like, I don't know, is it good? Like that was his answer, was like, I don't know, the poem just has to be good, and if it's racist, it's bad. If it's supremacist, it's shitty poetry. So that's your answer. And I was like, oh, okay, well. Yeah. Is there any other questions?
I have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's really okay.
I was thinking a lot while you were reading about deleting, like the poem about deleting conversations, and like since this was written, I'm assuming like pre-pandemic, because you had said 2018, like do you feel like this new moment of constant surveillance and how that is impacting like your day-to-day life has influenced your writing practice?
Oh wow, that's a good question. I mean, I think about surveillance all the time, and it sucks, and it feels like it feels now like even more inescapable than before. And I still feel, but you know, a few years ago, I felt like extremely paranoid because I was part of like a mass demonstration arrest case that kind of dragged on for a year, and a lot of the stuff was around text messages. So I felt like particularly paranoid after, you know, being documented by the state so intensely. Has it affected my writing practice? Well, I can say like a little bit about my writing practice. When I write poetry, I tend to handwrite, unless like in the early kind of like new like one-off poems or like stuff I'm kind of writing into a bigger project until it gets too like lengthy, and then I'll like type stuff up. And when I'm writing prose, I tend to just write on the laptop. I think being forced to be surveilled like constantly from like a labor and work perspective, and then returning to the laptop and the screen to reset and have a creative practice is a challenge for me. Absolutely. It's hard to want to do that, and I like crave discipline. But I'm working on a prose project right now, and I don't want to handwrite it. I mean, I do free writing and stuff like that. Maybe the audience will appreciate a free writing exercise, but a free writing thing that I love to do is I call it like one of my mentors, Juliana Spar, like shared this with me at Mills, but it's like you do a timed free writing thing, and you can do like blind speed typing, like turn the brightness off on your laptop if you want to do it on your laptop, or you can handwrite it. I tend to handwrite it, but you can do like 5 minutes of free writing, and then a 2-minute break, and then 10 minutes of free writing, and then a 2-minute break, and then 20 minutes of free writing, and then a 2-minute break, and then 10 minutes of free writing, and then a 2-minute break, and then 5 minutes of free writing. And so it's a whole crescendo. And I find that like the first like 5 and 10 minutes, I'm just like clearing out my brain. When I get to 20 minutes, it's like the sweet spot. Like it's stuff is happening, and then you like come down. But I hope that is a useful exercise for people who are doing writing.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think partially that was a selfish question because it's impacted my writing practice. And I was like, maybe you have some brilliant ideas for what can get us through that. But I super appreciate that exercise.
I mean, I can be honest with you, I haven't written very much poetry in the last year. It's been a real challenge. And part of it is because like the range of experiences I have is so different and so limited and repetitive. But I've been working on a prose project, so that's okay. I think someone wanted to hear the timing again.
So yeah, I'm typing it out for them in the chat.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you.
On the poetry thing, I feel like I've been like trying to figure out why that is for me as well, which is unfortunate because I started a poetry book for my thesis. Anyway, I feel like it's because like our lives have become so fragmented, and like, you know, there was, like you said before, there at one point where there was such like a fullness of experience, and now it's so limited, but also like in this really traumatic, like PTSD, like fragmented life, and like poetry is fragments, so you're like, I think maybe for me, I'm like, I can't handle more of this, please stop. But yeah, I've heard that being a lot of people's experience, that like poetry just isn't it right now.
Which pains me.
Yeah, me too.
I've done a lot of like reading because I have like a big conceptual frame for a poetry project I want to work on, and so I've just been trying to do like reading and research, but like I'm not really generating anything into that, but that's okay.
Yeah, it is okay. All of it's okay is what I think the summary of this conversation has been for me. It's like, it's okay to be angry. It's okay to not write poetry. It's okay if like somebody doesn't like it, but you're angry. It's okay. All of these things are actually totally fine. Yeah, I am so grateful. Thank you so much, Andrea. Like, this was really great for me, and I hope it was great for everyone else.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved your questions and flattered at that introduction, and it felt great to read from this project.
Yeah, so and thank you everyone else that came and is here still, and I'm going to be thinking about a lot of these things for a long time. And if you know someone that missed it, and someone that like wants to see this is going to be archived and up on the Wendy Subway website in the coming weeks.
Amazing.
And yeah, and when can you pre-order your book? Is that coming soon?
It should be really soon. We just finalized a cover like this morning. So I'm hoping it'll be up on the Nightboat website soon, and I will definitely share. I can share with Wendy's too if you wanted to share with everyone who attended.
Yeah, definitely. We would love to share that with everybody.
Yeah, maybe we can add Andrea's new book to the little bookshelf feature.
Yeah, we can do a featured shelf. I would love that. Yes.
Yeah.
I love that.
Beautiful.
Great. So again, I want to thank Wendy's and Marianne. Thank you so much, and Frat for helping me with this, and of course Andrea for like intense brilliance, and everyone that came and participated and listened and chatted with us and told us your zodiac sign. That was really important. Yeah, so the next conversation in the series is Susan Briante, which is on April 12th, same place, same time. And so look out for that, and hope you all have a beautiful night, and good night. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, look for Villainy merch.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.